Hi, Titans. It is Thursday, the 29th of October, and we are talking about Chapter 8, the Just Society. So what I'm going to do is go along with the study guide and with the slideshow that I uploaded last night. So first of all, in terms of political philosophy, we want to remember that that's different than political science, which is a different school of thought. And so political philosophy is similar to ethics in that it talks about the way things should be in a society versus the way things are. So if you're studying political science, if you're taking a poli-sci class, that's going to talk about the facts, not the prescription or the normative claims that philosophy makes. So it's like ethics and it's like aesthetics, and it's similar to poli-sci. It's just it takes a different approach. So just good to know that. Let me rearrange some stuff here. Okay, so we're looking at the first part of chapter 8, chapter 8, 8.1 to 8.3. Let's see here. So it mostly talks about government, the role of government, and distribute the goods in society. How do we know how to give what we have to people? Which people should we give it to? Obviously, if we gave everything to everybody, that would be pretty inefficient. Like if we gave, I don't know, a loaf of bread, a container of detergent, a credit for a class at GTCC, to every single household, that would be pretty inefficient because some people would already have all that stuff covered. Other people wouldn't want it, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't want to give just everything to everybody in this sort of way that just sort of doesn't make sense. But we also want to recognize that goods are not distributed equally, that we are not dealing with a level playing field. Some people have a lot, some people have a little, and that's maybe unjust. And so if we're going to equalize that, how do we do that? So the first person that the book talks about is Plato. So Plato is coming to us from the past, talking about stuff and ideas that he had about 2,500 years ago. And so it's in a way very elegant, and in another way very elitist, and some might say unfair. So let's look at his idea of justice. So he believed in a system called a meritocracy. The crazy part is the rule, and the merit is the merit part, but he did not like democracy. Demos is people. So rule of the people, not a fan. And you can see why if you think about Plato's own experience with democracies. So there was a vote taken by the people in terms of what should happen to his beloved mentor, Socrates, and the vote came down that Socrates was guilty and he should be sentenced to death. And so Plato thought that was incredibly unfair because Socrates was doing a great service to Athens, and so he was quite brokenhearted at the decision that the people, the demos, had made. And so he's not a fan. He thought that democracy was mob rule. If you have absolutely everybody involved in making a decision, Plato thought they're probably going to make the wrong decision because a lot of them don't know what they're talking about. So he thought instead that society should be governed the way he thought that we were designed. He thought that our soul was in 3 parts, and he thought that society should also be arranged in 3 parts. So there's a couple of tables in the slideshow that I think are useful, I hope are useful. So the red one, I don't know what number this is, let's say 6. The 6th slide has a table that shows the soul and then also the class and how they correspond. So in terms of thinking about the soul, he thought it was in 3 pieces, 3 parts, tripartite, 3 parts, and they are reason, appetite, and passion. So, but the order is reason, passion, and appetite. So reason is what we want to be. If you can imagine a charioteer, right? Somebody who has these 2 horses of passion and appetite in front of him, but the reason is what has the reins. So I don't know, that's a helpful image for me. So we want to make sure that reason is in charge, because if you think about passion being in charge, or worse yet, appetite being in charge, then we have a person who a lot of times, or all of the time, would seem like they're out of control, and we don't want that. So the soul is interested in knowledge, and what it's really aiming for is wisdom. The passionate part of us is the part that gets us out of bed in the morning, and the part that gets us involved in various things. And its interest is honor, and the highest thing that it's aiming for is courage. Appetite is the animal part of our nature, of our soul. So that's the kind of thing that tells us we need to eat, we need to mate, we need to fight, we need to sleep. Those animal instincts are at the base of our soul. We don't want those in charge, because then we'll just have, chaos, and that's bad. So those are interested in pleasures, or just, I don't know, the attainment of the appetite. And the highest thing that we're looking for there is temperance. All right, so we have reason, passion, appetite in our soul. We also have reason, passion, appetite in our society. So let's just flip it and go from the bottom to the top. So the appetite, these are the commoners, the laborers, the people who work with their hands, the people who do all the things that need to be done. They have these skills that are necessary, but they're not intellectual. And then in the middle, we have the police, the soldiers, the warriors, all these people who sort of keep the order. And obviously we need them too, but we don't want them in charge. Who we want in charge are the people who are interested in wisdom, and these are the philosopher kings. So these are the people that Plato thinks should be in charge. They are the best people because he values intellect and wisdom. So if you're working at that high of a level, then he thought you were the best and you should have all the power. And then in the slideshow, I compared this to the id, the ego, and the superego. If you're aware of psychological stuff, it's really windy outside. If you are interested in a sort of a Freudian analysis of how we are set up as people, the id, the ego, and the superego correspond to these parts of the soul. And then, I mentioned that if you have a narrative, a story that involves 3 characters, you can look to see if they correspond to the id, the ego, and the superego, because often they will. Well, this theory has a lot of critics, maybe not surprisingly, because it is elitist. It's saying that the people who are at the top are the intellectually minded people. They're the best people, the people who deserve the power. And he also thought that people were just sort of born this way. They had either gold, silver, or bronze in their souls. But it's very similar, might remind you of the Hindu caste system that we talked about in the religion chapter. You can't really move. There's no upward mobility. Once you are put into this category, that's it for you. That's where you stay. He definitely didn't think that all men were created equal, or all people were created equal, right? There are some people who are better than others. And And because of this, we don't have a democracy. We have a rule of the philosophers, but they are kings. So that means that they're going to lay down the law and the rest of us are going to have to follow the law. So that doesn't sit well with a lot of people, myself included. Moving on to social contract theory. So the main person we think of when we're talking about social contract theory is Thomas Hobbes. He had a so if there's a video on the website that is by 8-bit, and I think we've looked at videos by them before. This one's pretty brief. I'm going to say it's like 3.5 minutes, something like that. But it talks about Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. We're not going to talk about Rousseau. I don't know why, but he's not in this chapter. But we are going to talk about Hobbes, Locke, and Rawls in looking at social contract theory. But the idea behind social contract theory is that, according to Hobbes, we're all, without a leader, we're all going to be at each other's throats for the scarce resources that we have. A lot of movies have been made with this theme in mind. Waterworld, all the Mad Max movies, the movie The Road, based on the novel The Road, which is really good. So the idea is, in a post-apocalyptic society, resources are scarce. It could be gasoline, it could be food, it could be clean water, whatever it is, these resources are scarce. And if we don't have somebody to keep us in line, what we're going to do is we're going to fight each other, because everyone wants to survive. We all have that drive to survive. And so in that way, we're all equal, but we'll also do whatever it takes to survive. And that's not good if you want to have a society that lasts for a while. So Hobbes thought what we needed was to form agreements with each other and also with our leader. And the idea is the rights that we have, we'll give those up. The right to basically do whatever we want, we'll give that up to the leader in return for the leader keeping us safe. The idea of the leader, though, is somebody, think of the worst, I don't know, authority figure you can think of, the worst parent, the worst teacher, the worst boss, somebody who, if you just step out of line just a little bit, they bring the hammer down, and it is not pretty. But Hobbes thought that we need that. If we don't have that, we're going to try to cheat each other and kill each other, and that's not good. So what we really need is somebody who's going to keep us in line. We're going to agree to give up our power, our rights to that leader, but that leader is going to keep us safe from each other and make sure that we do honor our promises to each other. Otherwise, we're not going to honor our promises to each other. Why would we? Right? You have people scamming each other all the time and ripping each other off, unless that really strict leader is going to keep us in line. So yeah, the book says something like, we're all egoists, we're all driven by our own self-interest, and we can't get what we want, though, because well, we don't have any self-control. And there's a discussion of the prisoner's dilemma. So prisoner's dilemma, I'll explain it in a second. There are a lot of really great videos on your website, but also if you're interested in it, you can get in contact with me, or just go to YouTube and type in prisoner's dilemma. There's a lot of cool stuff that'll come up. But basically, what it is a situation where everyone would be better off if they cooperated. So it would be better for the group overall if there were cooperation, but it's better for the individual if they don't cooperate, if they say they're going to cooperate and then they don't. So there's a little table on slide 16, and it describes a situation where you have two prisoners, Al and Bob. So they have committed a small crime. They are caught by the police. They're put in separate interrogation rooms, and they're given the same deal. You can either not say anything and keep your agreement with your partner not to say anything, or you can rat your partner out. So each is given the same options. And then the way it looks is if they both stay silent, so they both honor their commitment that they had before going in, each prisoner will get 2 years. But let's say Al rats out Bob. In that case, Al gets to go free and Bob gets 6 years. And it's the opposite if they do the opposite thing. If Bob stays silent, or I'm sorry, if Bob rats out Al, but Al stays silent, it's the opposite result. Let's say they both rat each other out. They both get 4 years. Okay, so it's better if they cooperate, obviously. It's better overall if they cooperate. But individually, it's better if they rat the other person out and the other keeps their contract. And so that's the prisoner's dilemma. One of the resources I mentioned is this ad by this chocolate company in England. I don't know what year it came out, but it's the 1914 ad, probably in 2014, but it's the 1914 ad. I have it linked, but you can also look it up because there's the ad and then there's the making of the ad. But this was an actual thing that happened in World War II between the English and the Germans. We don't know how extensively this happened, but on Christmas Eve, between the English and the Germans, there was the agreement to stop fighting and to celebrate Christmas Eve together. So, you have these enemies at war with each other, but they decide to, call off the war just for one night so that they can, have one night of peace that everyone can enjoy. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Now, if you look into the story a little more, you find out that some people did get shot because, they would say, I'm surrendering, and then the other, group wouldn't believe them or whatever. And so some people died, but, it was a war. But the cool part is that they, sort of had this silent agreement that they would cooperate with each other. So sometimes the prisoner's dilemma turns out in unexpected ways. Usually we would think that, yeah, I mean, if you can get away with it, people would generally, screw the other person over. But sometimes that doesn't happen. And there are a couple other links, I think, in the resources to this English game show called Golden Balls. And it was a prisoner's dilemma where there was a certain amount of money involved. And if one person said they were going to split the money, the other person said they were going to steal the money. The person who said they were going to steal the money got all the money. If they both said they were going to steal the money, nobody got the money. If they both said they were going to split the money, they both split the money, right? And they were face to face, they could talk it out. But of course, there were betrayals. But the links that I show you, one is, it's called The Weirdest One Ever. It's kind of a really funny case. And the other link is just, a typical clip from this show. So, all right, moving on. So that's Hobbes. Hobbes has a very dim view of people. He thinks that we're all, egoists and that we're all involved in our own interests. Mostly that's what drives us. And so we need, this firm hand to sort of keep us in line. If we don't have that, then we have what we have in those apocalyptic movies where people are fighting each other and it's really ugly. And Hobbes says that life under such a condition would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Right? Life would be very short under a situation like that. Okay, John Locke doesn't have such a dim view of people. And he was a social contract theory who actually influenced the framers of our founding documents, which is pretty cool. But he said that we have a state, we have a government, if we agree to have one, and that the government will protect our inalienable rights. So what's kind of interesting is Hobbes thought that we could give up our rights, and John Locke didn't think that we could. right? It's impossible to give up these rights that we have. And he thought that those included life, liberty, and estate. So property, right? The right to own property. So life, liberty, the right to own property. So probably sounds pretty familiar, but a little bit different. And then there's a Tom Ritchie comparison, which I think is kind of entertaining. And I think I linked to Tom Ritchie before. He's an AP teacher somewhere in Tennessee or something. And he's great. He has these great videos on YouTube. But anyway, so let's talk about John Locke. Then we'll talk about how he's different from Thomas Hobbes. So he thought that the state of nature, which is what social contract theorists call that imaginary time when we don't have rulers. Oh, the lights are flickering. I don't know if I'm going to lose power, but anyway, so we have our natural rights under a state of nature, according to John Locke. So there's a comparison on slide 25 of the show. So for Hobbes, the ideal leader would be an absolute monarch, right? So that ruler is, keeping us all in line and making sure we don't tear each other to pieces and that we keep our contracts with each other. For Locke, the ideal form of government would be a democracy. Hobbes thought that we had rights that we're born with, but we give those up in order to have this society. Locke didn't think that we could give up those rights. They are inalienable. We cannot be separated from them. The purpose of government for Hobbes is to keep law and order, and the purpose of government for Locke is to protect individual liberties and rights. So you could think of Locke as a libertarian, if you're familiar with the political definition of a libertarian. So this is a government that is not that involved in our lives, except that it makes sure that our rights aren't violated by other people. So this is a very limited idea of government. And there are libertarians walking around today, but I'm just saying that Locke was, sort of in that same line of thought. Let's see. So let's say if you're Hobbesian and you think that the king, the Leviathan is what he called it, but that is the way to go. And what if what we get is a really abusive and horrible Leviathan? Well, we're stuck with it, right? Too bad, right? Better luck next time. Not so for Locke. Locke thought if we voted in somebody that turned out to be abusive, it was grounds for a revolt. We could have a revolution and remove that leader. So there's a big difference. There's a link to, or there's a slide that has the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, and you'll see that that's very similar to what Locke had said, except that instead of life, liberty, and the right to own property, or life, liberty, and estate, what we decided to say was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, but Locke heavily influenced the writers of our founding documents. Okay, then in that video, that 8-bit philosophy video, there's also a discussion of Rousseau, who's not in the book, but does have an interesting view of people. He basically is the opposite of Hobbes. He thought that in a state of nature, we'd all be sort of, living in a commune and, playing a guitar around a campfire, and that we'd be just more at peace and more cooperative without government. So that's another way of looking at it, sort of very different from Hobbes. Well, people don't really talk about social contract theory, aside from Rousseau and Locke and Hobbes, for a long, long time, until this guy came along, John Rawls, and he wrote a book, I think in 1971, and it was called I can't remember, but anyway, wrote a very influential book on social contract theory. So there's a little bit of vocabulary here, but the idea is pretty cool. So what he said is we want to start from an original position behind a veil of ignorance. Okay, what does that mean? So what he wanted was contractors to who were free, equal, and rational contractors to imagine designing a society from an original position. And behind the veil of ignorance means that they don't have any idea where they're going to end up in society. They might be super rich, they might be in a wheelchair, they might be a fantastic playwright, they might really be skilled in economics, not sure what race they're going to be, not sure what sexual orientation they're going to be, not sure if they're going to be trans or cis, no idea, right? Well, if you're behind the veil of ignorance like that, and you can imagine all these possibilities, and you want to design a society, John Rawls thought that inevitably the contractors would design a society that helped to make sure that everyone was taken care of. So we've got, wheelchair ramps, and we've got medical access that's just the same as for anybody for trans people. And we've got people who everybody can go to school if they want to, and everybody has access to the job that they want and all this kind of thing. So it's a way to help ensure that there's justice, because nobody is barred from anything simply in virtue of the fact of these, differences that we have. So it's kind of a cool idea. And let's see. Yeah, I mean, he thought that if you didn't know where you would end up, this would ensure that you would make that decision that was helpful to everybody. That's the end of the slides, actually. So then want to make sure that you understand the nature of political philosophy and why it's important to think about it. What is distributive justice? I mentioned it a little bit, but make sure that you understand that concept. Make sure that you understand Plato's theory of justice, and then think about social contract theory in terms of Hobbes, Locke, Rawls, and Rousseau if you're interested. And then next week, we're going to talk about Marxism and feminist theories of justice. And then we're going to get to my favorite topic, which is aesthetics after that. And then after that, there's one more topic, and then we're done, y'all. So we're getting down to it. This week, you have a forum, and the forum's a little bit different because you may have noticed that there's a short story after every section in our textbook, and we haven't looked at any of those yet. But this week we're looking at The Lord of the Flies. So if you know The Lord of the Flies, you're in really good shape. You might have read it in high school. You might have just read it for funsies. My sister-in-law reads it every year just because she loves that novel. But I'm not asking you to read the entire novel, but I'm asking you to read the section at the end of the chapter. And you have to read it kind of carefully, because if you don't know the setup or you don't know the characters, it's going to be kind of confusing. But basically, the setup is that this plane crashes and all the adults who are on the plane die, and what we have left are schoolboys, and I think they're in age from like age 6 to age 14. And if they land on this island, and at first everything's fine, and they set up little, everybody has their chores to do, and some people hunt and some people gather fruit, and everything's going great. But quickly that order starts to fall down, and people start to fight with each other. And so the section is a little bit about that, where people are upset that this order is starting to fall apart, and there's some violence that breaks out. And anyway, so read the section, and if you're still confused, I'm sure there are resources on the internet that can help you to understand it a little bit better. And if you have any questions, then I encourage you to get in touch with me. And let me see.